Ryan Gosling stepped out of the supermarket, balancing 2 paper bags filled with groceries as the sun began its slow descent, bathing the sky in deep hues of amber and crimson. The gentle evening breeze carried the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery, mingling with the subtle scent of warm asphalt. It was a calm, ordinary evening in a city that never truly slept, a momentary pause in the relentless pulse of Los Angeles. Lost in his own thoughts about whether he'd unwind with an old noir film or dive into a captivating book once he reached home, Ryan's contemplative stride suddenly faltered when he felt a delicate tug at the hem of his jacket. Looking down, he saw a small girl, no older than 6, with tousled blonde hair and wide blue eyes that brimmed with palpable fear. Dressed in a simple pink dress, she clutched the fabric of his jacket with tiny, trembling fingers as if seeking solace in his presence. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The busy hum of the supermarket parking lot faded into a quiet murmur as Ryan crouched to meet her gaze. In that brief, silent exchange, the terror in her eyes told a story of deep distress. Before he could utter a word of comfort, the sliding doors of the supermarket hissed open, and out strode a woman in jeans and a sky-blue blouse, her hair tied up in a tight bun. With a forced smile and an air of urgency, she rushed toward the girl, grabbing her arm firmly. "There you are. You scared me, sweetheart," she exclaimed in a voice that tried too hard to sound caring. Yet, something in her tone was edged with impatience, and her grip on the girl was all too tight. Ryan's eyes flickered between the terrified child and the woman, noting how the little girl, despite the apparent familiarity, did not respond with relief, but with a cold, resigned hesitation. The child's gaze remained fixed downward, and her small fists tightened at her sides. "I'm her aunt," the woman insisted, her voice brittle with false reassurance. But Ryan's instincts, honed by years of noticing the unspoken truths in people, told him that something was profoundly amiss. He asked gently, "Is she okay?" The woman's forced laugh and evasive reply, "Yes, of course. She just gets anxious around strangers," failed to dispel the unease that gripped him. Then, noticing the child's silence and the peculiar way she had not spoken her own name, Ryan inquired, "What's her name?" The woman hesitated for a split second before blurting out, "Sophie," an answer that made Ryan's stomach churn with foreboding. Before Sophie could speak a word, the woman's demeanor shifted abruptly as she tugged her arm, preparing to leave. But Ryan's instincts, now fully alert, refused to let her slip away with the girl. "I'd like to wait until security arrives to confirm everything is okay," he stated calmly, his eyes locked on hers. The woman's smile faded into a snarl, and with a look of sudden panic she bolted towards a row of parked cars, dragging little Sophie behind her. Without a moment's hesitation, Ryan dashed after them. His heart pounded as he weaved between vehicles and startled pedestrians, his voice echoing in urgent shouts of, "Stop! Don't run!" The chase was on, a desperate pursuit fueled by his unwavering determination to protect the child. Sophie, caught in the whirlwind of fear and confusion, hesitated before darting a few inches toward him, her eyes wide with silent plea. As Ryan sprinted across the parking lot, the cacophony of the urban evening, the distant hum of engines, murmurs of onlookers, seemed to fade into insignificance compared to the high stakes of the moment. Every step felt weighted with responsibility as he closed the gap between himself and the fleeing woman. His presence, resolute and commanding, was a stark contrast to her frantic, shoving movements. At one point, she glanced back, her eyes flashing with a mix of fury and desperation. Ryan's voice, low and firm, rang out again. "The police are on their way. It's over." But the woman, driven by a primal urge to escape, tightened her grip on Sophie and made a break for a dark-colored van parked near the lot's exit. Ryan lunged, catching her wrist just as she attempted to shove Sophie into the van. A struggle ensued, raw and desperate, a battle of wills unfolding under the harsh glow of streetlights. The woman fought fiercely, her voice a ragged whisper of, "Get off me," while Ryan's grip held steady, his resolve unyielding. Around them, a few curious bystanders stopped in their tracks, and the distant wail of police sirens began to slice through the tension. As chaos peaked, Ryan's focus never wavered from Sophie, who trembled in his peripheral vision, clinging to his leg with silent terror. With a final, decisive effort, Ryan secured his hold and commanded in a steady tone, "The police are here. Let her go." The woman's defiant scowl faltered as she realized escape was no longer an option. In the ensuing moments, the flashing red and blue lights of patrol cars flooded the lot, and uniformed officers rushed in, bringing the frantic chase to an abrupt end. In the ensuing quiet, as Sophie was gently reunited with her real mother and the assailants were taken into custody, Ryan stood amid the fading echoes of the confrontation, his body aching but his spirit unbroken. The determined glint in his eyes and the soft, reassuring words he offered to Sophie, "You're safe now, you're not alone," had transformed a terrifying ordeal into a beacon of hope. In that moment, as the city resumed its nocturnal rhythm, Ryan Gosling's intervention had not only saved a life, but also reaffirmed that sometimes the courage to act decisively is the light that pierces even the darkest nights. After that fateful chase, the chaos of the parking lot gradually began to subside. Sirens wailed in the distance as police vehicles arrived on the scene, their flashing lights throwing dancing patterns over the asphalt. Ryan stood amid the confusion, his heart still pounding as he watched the attackers being quickly apprehended. The woman, her face a mask of desperation and rage, was led away by officers, while the accomplice, subdued by his own panic, slumped to the ground. Sophie, the little girl whose eyes had been wide with terror moments before, was gently embraced by her real mother, a distraught woman who had arrived frantically, her face etched with worry and relief as she reunited with her daughter. Inside the police station's waiting area, the atmosphere was subdued yet filled with an undercurrent of hope. Ryan stayed by Sophie's side, speaking softly and reassuringly as she clung to her mother's arm. An officer approached Ryan, asking him to recount every detail of the incident. With measured clarity, Ryan described the series of events: the initial tug on his jacket, the eerie stillness in the girl's eyes, the suspicious demeanor of the woman claiming to be her aunt, and the ensuing frantic chase that culminated in the arrival of law enforcement. His testimony, delivered in a calm, precise manner, left no doubt about the courage that had driven him to act. Meanwhile, Sophie's mother, her voice shaking as she expressed her gratitude, was comforted by the kind words of the officers. They assured her that the suspects were known to law enforcement and that this incident had, unfortunately, been part of a pattern of previous abduction attempts. As she held her daughter tightly, Sophie's eyes, still red from tears, met Ryan's for a fleeting moment, a silent exchange of gratitude and reassurance that the danger had passed. Outside the station, as the first hints of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Ryan remained in contact with the police. He provided further details when requested and ensured that every piece of evidence, including the video recordings taken by onlookers, was securely passed along to the authorities. The incident was already making waves on social media, and Ryan's brave intervention had sparked a broader conversation about the safety of children and the responsibilities of bystanders. Messages of thanks, praise, and calls for increased vigilance flooded his phone, but Ryan's focus remained steadfast on the well-being of Sophie and her family. Later that morning, Ryan drove Sophie and her mother to a local community center that offered support services for families in distress. The center, a warm and inviting space with soft lighting and caring staff, provided a temporary haven from the emotional turbulence of the night. As they entered the center, Sophie was wrapped in a cozy blanket, and a compassionate counselor greeted her with a gentle smile. Ryan stayed with them for a while, helping to complete the necessary forms and reassuring Sophie that she was safe now. In quiet conversation, Sophie's mother explained how the terror of the night had shaken her, but also how grateful she was that someone had intervened when it mattered most. Ryan listened, offering his own reflections on the importance of stepping in when others are in danger. He emphasized that courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to act despite it. While Sophie and her mother received counseling and support at the center, Ryan found a quiet moment to reflect on the night's events. Sitting in a small cafe near the center, he sipped on a steaming cup of coffee as he scrolled through messages on his phone. Messages from strangers who had seen the viral video, expressing their admiration and urging him to keep fighting for what was right. His mind wandered back to the image of Sophie's tearful yet relieved face, and he knew that this experience was a poignant reminder of the fragile nature of safety and the profound impact of a single act of compassion. Back at the police station, as the day progressed, officers continued to investigate the identities and motives of the suspects. The revelations that the woman and her accomplice had been on a watch list for multiple abduction attempts reinforced the gravity of the situation. In a brief debriefing, an officer told Ryan, "Thanks to you, we've been able to get these dangerous individuals off the streets. You've made a real difference tonight." Ryan simply nodded, his expression sober and thoughtful, aware that his actions had set in motion a chain of events that could potentially save more lives in the future. After all the official business was concluded, Sophie's mother received assurances from the authorities that she and her daughter would be safe and that further protective measures would be taken. As they left the station, the cool morning air felt refreshing, a tangible contrast to the tension of the previous night. Ryan drove them to their temporary accommodation arranged by a local charity, where they could rest and recover from the ordeal. In the quiet of that safe space, as the city slowly awoke to a new day, Ryan sat with Sophie and her mother, listening to their stories and offering words of comfort. He knew that while the scars of the night might never fully fade, the memory of that act of courage could serve as a beacon of hope and resilience. Throughout the day, Ryan's thoughts were a steady murmur in the back of his mind, a reminder that sometimes a single decision, a single moment of intervention, can ripple outward to change countless lives. He resolved to stay involved, to check in on Sophie and her mother in the coming days, and to continue advocating for greater vigilance and protection for vulnerable children. As the day wore on and the city's rhythms resumed, the memory of that night remained etched in his heart, a testament to the power of compassion in a world where fear and cruelty often threaten to overshadow our humanity. And so, with the sun high in the sky and the promise of a new beginning, Ryan drove away with a quiet satisfaction. He knew that the night's events had not only saved a little girl, but had also ignited a spark that would, hopefully, lead to lasting change. The world might be full of darkness, but with acts of courage like this, even the smallest light could guide us all toward a safer, more compassionate future. In the days that followed the harrowing night, the ripple effects of Ryan Gosling's intervention began to transform the lives of everyone involved. The incident, which had unfolded in the dim glow of the parking lot under flickering red and blue lights, quickly became a turning point not only for Sophie and her mother, but also for the community and the authorities. News of the attempted abduction spread rapidly through social media and local news outlets, prompting a public outcry against those who preyed on the vulnerable. The police's swift action and Ryan's decisive courage were hailed as a beacon of hope, igniting conversations about child safety, the responsibilities of bystanders, and the need for stricter protective measures. In the aftermath, Ryan continued to visit the local community center where Sophie and her mother had sought solace. The center, once a modest refuge for families in distress, buzzed with renewed purpose as volunteers and counselors worked tirelessly to support those affected by the incident. Ryan's steady presence provided comfort not only to Sophie, who had clung to his words in the chaos, but also to others who had witnessed similar acts of cruelty. He spoke with parents, teachers, and even local law enforcement, urging them to implement better protocols and community watch programs that would safeguard children from being exploited. At the police station, officers compiled evidence and witness statements, piecing together every detail of the chase and confrontation. Ryan's testimony was detailed and measured, offering a clear account of the events that had unfolded. The detectives soon confirmed that the woman and her accomplice had a long history of failed abduction attempts, a fact that underscored the urgency of the situation. This information spurred a broader investigation into the networks behind these crimes, with the local district attorney pledging to crack down on those responsible for targeting vulnerable children. In the ensuing weeks, several arrests were made, and community leaders organized town hall meetings to address concerns over child safety, with Ryan's actions serving as a rallying point for change. Meanwhile, Sophie's mother, still reeling from the traumatic events, began to rebuild her life with the support of newfound community resources. With the help of social workers and charitable organizations, she secured temporary housing and access to counseling services that enabled her to process her ordeal. Ryan made sure to check in on them frequently, offering his time and assistance whenever needed. His gentle assurances and genuine care transformed what had been a night of terror into the beginning of a healing journey. For Sophie, the once terror-stricken expression in her eyes slowly gave way to tentative smiles as she realized that there were people in the world willing to stand up for her, to protect her from harm. As the film set where the initial confrontation had occurred gradually returned to its routine operations, a subtle but undeniable shift took place within the production community. Crew members who had long felt marginalized and mistreated found their voices. They began sharing their experiences in anonymous forums and during informal gatherings, demanding respect and fair treatment. The producers, moved by the overwhelming support for Ryan's actions, initiated sweeping reforms. Policies were rewritten to ensure that every member of the crew, regardless of their position, would be treated with dignity and professionalism. Regular training sessions on workplace respect and inclusion were instituted, and a confidential reporting system was established to address grievances promptly. Late one evening, as the city settled into a peaceful lull and the hum of activity faded into the background, Ryan sat quietly in his car outside the community center. Reflecting on the chain of events, he felt a profound sense of responsibility and hope. He had not only saved a child from a dangerous situation, but had also helped spark a broader movement for change. The impact of that night resonated deeply within him. Each act of courage, each moment of compassion, had the power to alter lives and reshape entire communities. Ryan knew that while the scars of the past might remain, the promise of a safer, kinder future was within reach if people continued to stand up for one another. In the quiet of the early morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the horizon, Sophie's mother hugged her daughter tightly, murmuring words of gratitude to the unseen hero who had intervened when it mattered most. Sophie, her eyes still reflecting the remnants of fear, looked up at her mother with a newfound sense of security, and Ryan, driving away into the awakening city, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He understood that tonight was just one chapter in a long, ongoing story. A story of resilience, courage, and the unyielding belief that every life matters. As he merged onto the busy streets, the city's lights receded behind him, and he carried with him the enduring hope that even in the darkest moments, the light of compassion could guide us all toward a better tomorrow.